Welcome back to Stuff About Money. I'm Xavier Angel, and today we're going to be talking about real-life money decisions that pharmacists face from the time that they receive that first paycheck all the way through retirement. And so this isn't just focused around pharmacists, because any individual that has graduated from college and entering into the work environment are going to face these questions that our guest, Christopher M. Bland, and I are going to talk about. So today, as I mentioned, our guest is Christopher M. Bland, PharmD. He is an Albert W. Jowdy Professor in Pharmacy Care at the University of Georgia College of Pharmacy. He has over 25 years of pharmacy experience as a practicing pharmacist, educator, mentor, researcher, and entrepreneur. Chris is a co-founder of the online learning platform Teach Me Pharm and co-author of Integrate, a guidebook for creating healthcare teams. He is a co-author of the upcoming book entitled Practical Personal Finance Management for Healthcare Professionals, based on his experience teaching and mentoring students, residents, and practitioners throughout his career. So, Chris, thank you for coming today. We truly do appreciate it. Tell us a little bit about yourself, something other than what I just talked about there.
Oh, man. Well, Xavier, it's great to be with you. It's funny you say, pharmacists and whoever's graduating college. I have a daughter graduating college this year, and we've already kind of started having these discussions about what to do with that first paycheck, because she's actually going to get a real paycheck, which is nice. So one thing I would say is I work for UGA. I live in Savannah, Georgia, so we do have extended campuses across the state, and Savannah is known as like the little New Orleans. So we kind of have a connection there between the two of us.
I've often heard that, that they are very similar. They're sister cities, is what I've heard.
100%. Yeah, it's a great place to be.
And congratulations on your daughter about to graduate. I've got one that my son graduated from graduate school this past July. So we're having those conversations as well. So this is definitely a timely podcast that we're about to go through today.
Absolutely. Yeah, she's graduating nursing school. Super proud of her. She just signed her first contract.
Wow.
So it's the real deal now, Xavier.
Well, it's yes, her feet are hit the fire, and now she's got to get out there and get it done. So, Chris, before we start, one of the questions that we generally ask all of our guests when they come on is, what is one thing about money you wish you would have known when you first came out of school?
Wow, that's a great question. And when thinking about that, I think the number one thing I wish I would have known, probably better. I feel like I knew it, but I didn't really embrace it like I wish I had. And that is, the more time your money has to compound, the better it's going to be. And when you think about decisions in your 20s with what you do with money, that's going to have profound impact when you get late in your later years. I turned 50 this year, Xavier. I've been thinking about this a lot, and I do wish I would have put more away in my 20s, because it would have made an incredible impact, even more than it has even today.
I understand that. I just turned 52 yesterday, which was March 9th. So, and I look back on it in the same scenario. I wish I would have put more away then.
Yeah.
On episode 101, Eric and I actually talked about what were the top things about money that people wish they would have known 20 plus years ago. And compound interest is the most popular answer that we've heard over the past 2.5, 3 years now. So that is a powerful one.
Yeah. It was an answer on Jeopardy last night. How about that, Xavier?
Oh, wow.
Compound interest. Well, I guess I should say a question. Right. But anyway, it's so important. So important.
Yeah. So as we jump into this, one of the things that I've noticed when working with pharmacists over the years, when they graduate, the first thing that all of them are looking at is, what is my salary? And so one of the pieces of today is I want them to realize that that number becomes more of a focal point during a conversation. Salary is more than just what is that dollar amount. And the reality is compensation is much bigger than just a dollar amount. So let's start with the basics on what should individuals be looking at when they're accepting that first job. Salary versus hourly pay. Let's talk a little bit about that. What are your thoughts on that? What should they be looking at?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, when I think about salary and hourly pay, most pharmacists, when they graduate, are probably going to be offered hourly pay. And, hourly pay is fixed. You know what you're getting per hour. And kind of the idea is that for that hour you work, you get paid. Salary is much more generally associated with management and being a manager, maybe of a pharmacy or manager of a hospital pharmacy, manager in general. And it's fixed, right? You don't get any, if you work 45 hours or you work 50 hours, you're getting the same amount of pay as if you worked 40 hours. And so salary is much more driven towards upper level management or upper level management. Sometimes there are some good things associated with that, stability. You know exactly what you're going to get in the sense of, for that particular role. But I kind of like personally in the beginning, especially when you're gaining experience, that hourly pay is much more, it's fixed. And the other thing is too, you may end up working a side job. This happened a lot to me whenever I first graduated. Xavier, I don't know if you've ever heard of student loans. Have you ever heard of those? So I had a lot of those student loans when I graduated. My wife and I are both pharmacists. And so many times I would have a fixed hourly rate for the hours I worked. And then I would sometimes go and work a day or two a week at a separate entity and would be able to go do that and not have the salary responsibilities that often come with taking care of things for 45, 50, 55 hours a week, depending on the job. So I think it's key to know what your goals are. And what I would say is if you're listening to this podcast and you hear this, what's going to click in your mind is you need to have a plan.
Right.
And what I would say is the quality of life sometimes, and I know we're going to get into this discussion a little bit, is when you have your hours and they're fixed and that hourly pay, that's going to be much more predictable as far as your life goes. And so what I would say is salary is not a bad thing. It's a predictable thing, but hourly is predictable in its own way. And depending on how many hours you're working in a job, if you're salaried, you actually get paid less per hour depending on how many hours you're putting in. So
Right.
there are definitely some pluses and minuses to that. Most pharmacists are going to come out on the hourly side, and I think you can use that to your advantage for getting things like overtime and extra pay for holidays or shift differential, things like that.
Absolutely. And one of the things when I'm talking with young professionals, whether it be pharmacists in the medical industry, look at that. How are you getting paid? Because if you and I are both getting 120 a year, and I'm salary and you're hourly, well, those hours makes a huge difference, and what that total income is. If I'm working 55, 60 hours a week, that 120 doesn't go as far as if you're working the 40 hours and you're on an hourly salary. So I typically tell individuals when they're looking at the pay, how many hours are you expected to work? What are the typical weekly hours? How often do people work beyond those hours? So if you're expected to work 50 hours a week, are you working 52, 55, 60 hours a week? So those are some of the things that I stress that they want to take a look at. Truly understand what the structure of that particular job is. And so you mentioned shift differentials. So when you're talking shift differentials, explain that to us. So what does that mean?
Yeah. So depending on the job, and this is very much an advantage in the hospital setting, is that for many folks that work in a hospital and they work not a traditional day shift, so they're working a 4 to 12 or a midnight shift, a 12 to 8 in the a.m. a lot of times you will get more money per hour for evening hours or even weekend hours.
Mm.
So, for example, Xavier, my daughter, she's going to be a nurse, and one of the things that actually she's very excited about is her and her husband are going to be able to align their jobs to where she can work weekends and he'll have those same days off during the week where she can make a lot more money. And that's the same for pharmacists as well, is that if you work evenings or weekends or holidays, then many times your hourly pay goes up significantly for those hours worked. In the community setting, that's not as much of an issue just because most pharmacies have fixed hours that they're open. But in the health system world, in the hospital world, that is definitely an advantage that can significantly boost your pay over the course of a year.
So another important piece of compensation then would be shift differentials. You mentioned overtime. And those often is where those incomes really start to diverge, right? When you start getting those shift differentials, the overtime pay, you had the potential to make more income. So we do definitely need to take a look at those. What about incentives? How often do you see incentives being out there, being paid to whether it's healthcare professionals or pharmacists? Do you see that as part of that income often?
So it's funny. There's a great quote that I saw recently. It says, "You show me the incentive, and I'll show you the outcome." Right. And
Hmm.
so I think what's happening now in healthcare is we are starting to become more incentive based as far as trying to achieve certain outcomes. As far as pharmacy departments go, most of where I've seen a lot of this is people who work for industry. So they work for a pharmaceutical company. There are certain incentives and outcomes that can happen, if they meet certain metrics. And so for the most day-to-day pharmacist jobs, it depends on the job. Some of them have certain metrics they're trying to meet. If you meet an X number of prescriptions or you meet an X number of various metrics that are out there, then there can be an incentive for that. But that I would say that's the exception for most jobs rather
Hmm.
than the rule. But I think that is growing because I think that's one of the things that pharmacists I think face on the front end is that our salaries tend to be high in the beginning, but they don't increase a whole lot over the course of your career unless you are becoming into management or you're gaining some expertise that allows you to consult and do these things on the side. And that's kind of what I've done in my career to be able to do that. So the incentive, I think, is key. And that is a great thing to ask, I think, in an interview is what are the types of incentives that are present for this job? And I think if you ask that question from the get-go, that shows a lot of foresight on your part that you're just not there to do a job and be an employee, but you are interested in building that company and really trying to achieve their outcomes.
Mm. And so you mentioned a powerful thing there is make sure you ask about the incentive packages that are available. I often think that a lot of people don't ask that question. Myself included, I would have never have thought about that when I was coming out of school to ask about what incentives are available for me. So
Yeah, Xavier, my first job was with the federal government, and I did a horrible job with my initial structure to the point where I realized after the fact that I was actually on the lowest end of the pay structure. And it was
Mm.
so much harder to get it fixed later on, whereas your most powerful time to negotiate is in the beginning. And so I think asking those questions on the front end are critical. I used to work at a flea market to make money in the summer, and I didn't use those skills, Xavier. If I
Hmm.
had, I would have probably made more money because there's a lot of negotiation that takes place. I think people fear negotiation at times.
Yes.
And the truth is, negotiation is a normal part of asking for hourly pay and salary pay, et cetera. So I think it's an uncomfortable for some people, but at the end of the day, it's your best time to ask those questions is at the beginning.
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to put this together so we can come out and talk about what are some of the things that, as a graduating professional, what are some of the things that are available for you, and what should you be asking? What questions? What should you take a look at? You mentioned quality of life and side jobs. I'm starting to see a lot more of that as well, because when they are on that hourly salary, right, you've got a little bit more flexibility. I call it income flexibility. The ability to be able to go out there and have that, and I'm holding up air quotes, that side hustle or that side job. It allows you to be able to go out there and do other things. So, what should professionals be looking for when going out and doing these side jobs?
Yeah, so a couple things. One thing I would say is don't be afraid to ask questions and develop skills. One of the greatest things about the PharmD degree, in my opinion, is it offers you so many different skills that you can do. You have to interact with patients, you have to interact with prescribers, you have to write, you have to orally communicate well, and especially oral communication and written communication, those skills pay very well. And what I will say is that one thing to keep in mind is that side jobs don't have to give you health insurance. They don't have to
Mm-hmm.
give you retirement. They don't have to give you X amount of. My wife, when she worked as a pharmacist, at the same time I was working for the federal government, she was a contractor, Xavier,
Okay.
and her hourly pay was way more than mine because that company didn't have to pay for anything except for that hourly pay for the job. So I think that gives even more room for negotiation to really ask, those questions are, to negotiate to the highest amount possible. The other thing is, there's just so many things you can do that are applicable to healthcare. It could be writing a CE article. It could be speaking. It could be
Mm-hmm.
consulting. I've done all sorts of things over the course of my career, and a lot of this is due to your network. And
Right.
so I would say a big part of this too, Xavier and I are big LinkedIn fans, I think, is that that's how you can kind of help determine and find people. I've gotten consulting opportunities just based on something on my profile. Um, and I'll give a funny story. Recently, somebody found me. They were in Savannah, but they were looking at our website for UGA, and they didn't even realize I was in Savannah.
Hmm.
And so they just saw my name and they reached out to me for a consulting opportunity. So I think the things to keep in mind is that as you are young in your career, be developing skills, seek out
Right.
these opportunities, network, because then things will begin to flow to you, especially in years like 3 to 5.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you can tend to really have some cool opportunities, and you just never know where that's going to lead.
And some of those opportunities are out there, and I'm going to piggyback off of what you said is because I get this question when coming in and talking to third year pharmacy students, early in the fourth year. What are some of those opportunities out there that we can do if we don't want to be on a retail side or what have you? And there's PRN shifts, right? There's consulting work, go into teaching, or contract, as you mentioned earlier, but always be developing and honing those skills. And I think LinkedIn is a powerful tool as well for, entrepreneurs and early career starters. That's how we got connected, was through
Yeah.
LinkedIn. The
Yeah.
National Association of Clinical Pharmacists reached out one day and asked us about sponsoring their national convention. And from there, you and I wound up meeting. And I've been looking at the stuff you put out there on LinkedIn, and it's phenomenal how you are creating those opportunities for future use for yourself. So I think those early career income, Ernest, that's what we need to be doing out there.
Yeah. And what I would add to that, Xavier, is, when you look at this, talk to your faculty, talk to your
Hmm.
mentors, talk to those that you really feel comfortable with, because many times I have never, like, if a student comes to me and says, "Hey, can you tell me about how you do some of the stuff you've gotten?" Do you think I go, Xavier? Nah, I don't want to tell you. I'm not going to tell you any of that. That's my secret. No, I love talking about that. And guess what? there have been opportunities sometimes for a student even to, that I can connect them essentially to somebody else, especially if they have interest in a certain field, where I may not know a whole lot about that field, but I know somebody who does. And, I try to work with our alumni a lot of times to connect them, and then they can go and discuss, certain opportunities. So it really is, we want to, as my friend Andrew Sikora says, we want to pay it forward,
Right.
right? And that's what we want to do. And your mentors and the pharmacists or other healthcare professionals you worked with, a lot of times they know those opportunities and they're looking for the right person too.
So don't be afraid to ask questions and find a mentor and use him.
Yeah,
Or her.
absolutely.
Use him or
Yeah,
her.
exactly.
So, and I'm going to bring this back to full circle on that income flexibility, because I think there's an extremely powerful use for it. And that's, using that additional income, whether we're paying down student loan debt, increase your savings, and also having the opportunity to begin investing, not just for retirement, but figure out what your short-term goals are, your intermediate goals are, or your long-term goals, and begin investing, because compounding interest, as you mentioned earlier, is powerful. And that allows you to be able to do the things that you want to do now, tomorrow, and in the future. So one of the other pieces when it comes to compensation and benefits that I think is very powerful, and I think we forget to look at it, is what are those benefit choices that are available to you when choosing that first job? And are you taking it out with that first paycheck? Because they can cost you thousands if you're not contributing to a retirement account, let's say. That could potentially cost you thousands. So, Chris, what are some of the things that you would recommend from a benefit standpoint that new pharmacists, new medical professionals, nurses, what are some of the areas that you think they should be looking at?
Yeah, so when I think about benefits, I would say the hardest part is many people go into a job, their first job, just looking at salary or just looking at hourly
Mhm.
pay, like we talked about. But really, you got to be thinking, and for some of you, I think it's defining what your early goals are. Like for me, I was $100,000+ in debt. And so I was very much like, all right, I got to pay this off. So I'm going to work a lot of hours. I'm going to grind. I'm going to do this. And I did. But then you get to a point and you're like, I don't want to be working 55 hours
Right.
anymore a week. I'm tired. So certain benefits are really important. Vacation.
Hmm.
The saddest thing, Xavier, is you'll see an article in the Wall Street Journal. It's usually like once a year. And it's like so many people don't even take their vacation, and and they end up burning out. And
Hmm.
so how much vacation time do you get? When does that change? Like, okay, I get a week, 2 weeks now. When does that go up? What are the different types of holiday pay? Like, for example, I worked for the federal government for 14 and a half years, and we had 11 definite holidays. And so that's key. I mean, almost once a month, you're getting that day where you can spend time with your family. You can go a short vacation. And the other part of it is if you're working that holiday, you're going to be paid a lot more, at least in the
Right.
hospital system. So I think that it becomes a kind of a constant question and answer. But the benefits I think about are vacation. I think about, you talked about incentives. What are those? And then retirement. Um, the retirement is critical, and so many times we get so fixated on the salary, but in reality, I've heard of some companies, their the match that they offer, the 401k plan, the Roth 401k, those are questions that you gotta ask because
Yes.
those decisions and I cannot stress this enough, and it's why I'm writing my book. If you are in your 20s, this is the time to make the great decisions because when you're 50 like me or later this year, you're going to be very glad that you made those decisions. So pay
Absolutely.
is an important part, but it's one part. It's benefit, it's insurance, it's vacation, It's what type of retirement, how much do they match you? Um, all of those different things, sick pay. What does it look like if I'm out?
Hmm.
And so many things that have to be evaluated.
One of the questions you mentioned, the 401k, and one of the questions that I frequently hear when individuals are considering is, what should I contribute to? Is it the 401k side? Should I contribute to the Roth 401k? And then they often ask what the difference is. And so, not to get deep into the weeds, I'm just going to address that real quick. And so, when we're looking at traditional contributions into a 401k, those are the contributions that go into the account pre-taxed. So those are dollars. If you're making $100,000 a year and you're contributing at 5% and you're putting in $5,000 a year, your taxable income now is $95,000 as opposed to $100,000. So taxes are paid later, at a later date, typically when you reach that 60 years or older, or you are in retirement. The other option that is available is going to be the Roth 401k, and those are after-tax contributions that are going in. So that same person making $100,000 a year, if they're putting in $5,000 a year, they will currently pay taxes on $100,000, and then those withdrawals during retirement time are typically coming out tax-free during retirement time. So, like you mentioned, it is imperative that they start early. Look at what the matching contribution is from the employer, and then make your decision on how much you can put in right now. Also, I strongly recommend that when you are looking at making those contributions into the 401k, and I'm going to mention this because I often find that those within their first 1 to 3 years of working, they do not add a beneficiary on those 401k accounts.
Great point.
And a lot of times they don't do it because they're not married. They just don't think about something's going to happen to me. But you want to consider putting someone on as beneficiary, whether it's your parents, your siblings, whomever that may be. You definitely want to put something on there.
Yeah.
So definitely look at those benefits as well, because they are important. And Chris, offline, we had talked about employer matching myths. One of the ones that I hear often is many people assume that they're automatically getting the full matching contribution. And let's say if that matching contribution is 4%, well, I'm only going to put in 2% right now because I'm just getting out of school, just starting. I've got all of this debt, so I don't have enough money to put in there. And so they put 2 or 3% in, and they think that they're getting that 4%. So that is a myth. Whatever the employer contribution is, you have to pay attention to what it states in writing. Some say dollar for dollar up to 100% of 5% your contributions, then the employer will match at 5%. Others will do a percentage up to a certain, maybe 50 cents on a dollar up to 3%. So those are some of the things that you want to take a look at as well. But calculate how much you need to put in to get that full matching contribution from the employer.
Oh man, yeah, that is got to do it. I mean, I talk about that a lot with students and young pharmacists. Is a lot of times a company will give you like a 1% but that's nothing compared to what you could be making if you put up to the match. And so that's critical. Free money you're just leaving on the table.
Absolutely. And that free money adds to that baseline salary that you're receiving over the course of the year. Now, you don't get that money today, but it is going into an account for you, and eventually you will get it. One of the other myths that I hear is if I'm contributing to or making Roth contributions to my 401k, then many believe that their employer's match is going into the Roth bucket as well within that 401k. But the employer match is actually going into the traditional side. And then the Roth account that's building in that 401k is only my contributions that are going in there. So remember that employer contribution is going to be traditional. And then the employee, myself, I can put into the Roth account inside that 401k. So next, I want to get into let's talk about the six-figure myth that and you and I talked briefly about this as well. So when we start, a lot of people had that mindset that, well, I'm going to graduate, I'm going to be making six figures, whether it's $125,000. So I'm going to be financially okay. And that's not always the case because debt hasn't kicked in yet. When you're looking at that May, June, July. So what you mentioned your daughter, and you mentioned, or I'm going to say you, I'm going to back up, right? So you came out and you had six figures in debt, student loans when you got out of school. What were some of the things that you thought about before you started having those real life experiences or expenses?
Yeah, I just thought kind of like you, it's kind of a shock when you see your first paycheck
Mm-hmm.
and you realize what is being taken out.
Right.
I'll tell you a quick story with my son. My son just got his first job. He's 16, and he got his check, and he's like, "Dad, where did this money go?" And I said, "Well, part of this is to pay for Medicare." He goes, "Dad, I'm nowhere near Medicare age." And it's just like this idea of understanding what is going to be coming out from your check. I mean, when you look at it for the first time, there's a lot of things you're paying for that you're not even aware of. And so, when we came out, I wasn't thinking about any of those things. I just saw my first check and I was like, wow, this is a lot lower than I thought it was going to be, based on, my preconceived notions of
Mm-hmm.
how much I was going to be paid. And so with that, you've got to have a plan for what you're going to do automatically with that money. And so when
Right.
you look at your paycheck and you think through what are the different things that the money is going to go to, but then what money do I have left? What am I going to have a plan for that money that I am getting? And
Mm-hmm.
really the automated way I think is the best. And investing. I look at it as, and I saw this quote, Morgan Housel, who's a favorite author of mine. A dollar put away today is paying for your freedom tomorrow.
Absolutely.
And so having the opportunity, when you think six figures, let me tell you, a lot of people, you give them eight figures, they're still going to spend it. Seven
Mm-hmm.
figure. So really, no matter what degree of money you're making, if you have a plan, you're automatically giving yourself a raise because
Yes.
you're going to be very intentional with what you do with what you have. But that's the key is don't get lazy with thinking you've made X amount of dollars. Really, the key is what am I doing and how am I efficiently having a plan to spend,
Mm.
invest, and save for the long term.
And I go back to 22, 23 years ago when I was out looking for my first job. And when I graduated from college, my mind was I'm going to make six figures right off the bat. And I thought, okay, my income, that is wealth. And so if I'm making six figures, I'm going to be wealthy. And so I can go out and buy that Mercedes or that BMW. And I was fortunate enough to have an uncle that roped that in and said, no, right? Once you leave college, once you graduate and you go out on your own, those bills are going to start to come in. 5 to 6 months later, the student loan is going to kick in. That student loan note is going to be $800 to $900 a month. You still have to pay for your living expenses. I had never bought groceries before, so I didn't know what it was to go out and buy groceries for 2-3 weeks. And so, there is that idea, and I want to talk a little bit about this. Is income and wealth are not the same. So, what do you give us your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So income versus wealth. Wealthy is, the goal long term. Income is today. Wealth is built slowly over time. I think I have a turtle that likes to hang out in my yard, and I think about this all the time when I see the turtle. Is that slow and steady wins the race, but you got to start the race. That's the key.
Right. Right.
You have to start the race. And so wealth is the idea that, over time, you're going to get to a place where you have a lot more freedom over your time and your choices and the type of job you want to do and even the amount of hours you want to work. Income is important, but the important thing is, what are you doing with today's income to build wealth for the
Hmm.
future? And so you've got to have a long-term mindset, because I know many healthcare professionals that have had great incomes and they wake up at 40, Xavier, and they don't have any wealth. They got nothing to show for $100,000 plus a year, which is tragic.
Right.
It's tragic when you really think about it.
Yeah, it's that lifestyle inflation trap, right? Where we're
Mhm.
making these high incomes, our incomes are increasing, and as it increases, we want to get the bigger apartment, we want to get the bigger house, right? We want to go buy that new car or take these luxurious vacations, and as we're doing all of that, then our monthly expenses are increasing, and it's not allowing us to build that wealth by that age 45, 50, 55 years old. Right? Wealth building happens slowly. It does not happen overnight.
Absolutely. And I think if you're okay with that and you understand that, I think the hardest thing, Xavier, is
Mhm.
I mean, more than ever, people they want things to happen now.
Correct.
And I show my students, I show them what will happen over time with compound interest. And I show them that even if you look at 10 years out, it doesn't look that different.
Hmm.
But then between years 10 and 20 and 20 and 30, it just like massively grows. And so that's a hard lesson, for a please let me have it now kind of mindset. The average watch on a reel on Instagram is like 9 seconds, if that.
Right.
And so how do we lock in? That's why I think the automated investing before it ever gets to your paycheck is another important piece to this.
Oh, absolutely. So, income provides opportunities. Income is not wealth, and wealth is built slowly. So, take those opportunities to begin building habits early. Right. Begin building up those saving habits, consistent investing. Automate that. All of that is going to help you to eventually build that wealth. So, in wrapping up, what are some practical steps for young pharmacists that you would recommend?
Yeah, so for young pharmacists, I would say number one, you got the biggest advantage that many of us don't have, and that is you got the most time ever for your investing to really grow. Number two, do not be afraid to negotiate. This is a time where you need to kind of get over the idea of I'm just going to accept whatever is offered to me. I think it's very reasonable to have a solid negotiation. That is normal. And three, just look at every aspect of the job. Don't look at just salary. Salary is an important piece, but as I said, if you have a plan from the beginning, you're going to make whatever money you make. And the difference between, you know, a salary or an hourly rate here and there, really the key is, do you have a plan for what you're going to make? Because as Xavier, you were saying, that's what's going to result in wealth. You have to look at the finish line 30 years from now, but that starts by having a plan now. And so
Mhm.
negotiate, build those skills over time, because more opportunities will come. Build your network over time, and ask questions, because that's what you make now is not what you're going to make in the future.
Right.
But the wealth you build now is so important. That time compound interest is critical. And so to be able to do that early on in your career is so important.
Right. So, income isn't this, or six figures isn't the starting point. Right.
No.
But it's not the finish line. Wealth is built through time, discipline, consistent investing, and thoughtful financial decisions. So if you don't remember anything else from that, remember those four things: time, discipline, consistent investing, and thoughtful financial decisions. Well, Chris, I'm glad you came on. It's been a pleasure having the opportunity to get to know you and to talk to you today. And hopefully our listeners get a lot out of this. Anything in closing you'd like to say?
No, I would just like to say I want healthcare professionals, pharmacists, to really take ownership of this topic. We work too hard, and you've gone to school for too long to not have a plan for financial freedom and wealth long term. It's just a tragedy. So take the time, educate yourself, make that next step, because that step in your 20s, you will be so glad when you in your 40s and 50s that you've done it, and it's going to free you up to do all the things that you really want to do with the rest of your life.
Great stuff, Chris. I appreciate you coming on board and looking forward to having you join us in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, I love it. This is a lot of fun.